Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Astha and I'm a therapist and the founder of the Instagram page called The Perspective Co. You guys can follow me on Instagram to know more about my work related to therapy, mental health, and just psychology. And I'm super stoked to be a part of this collaboration with Mentor Mitr, where I get to talk about something that holds deep importance to me because, well, in fact, I'm a therapist, and clients who come to me for sessions, specifically therapy sessions, they become vulnerable with me throughout the journey of therapy. So they have trusted in me, and they've told me about their deepest, darkest secrets, and their fears and things they would never share with anybody else, for that matter. And I hold great responsibility as well as a lot of power to preserve their secrets, to preserve their vulnerabilities as a whole. So, while coming to the topic of the day, which is vulnerable or strong, what are you? When I heard of this topic for the first time, when Vidhi told me that, okay, we're going to be discussing this today, I was taken aback for a moment because I felt instantly that, vulnerability is it that just associates with you with strength, right? If you're not strong, then you can't be vulnerable, and being vulnerable in itself, it requires a lot of strength from your end. So when I heard about this topic, I felt that, okay, maybe this is a clickbait. Maybe what they're trying to understand is that how does the audience react to it. And a lot of people in my DMs were asking me that, don't you think vulnerability comes with strength and all of that? And that is what I'm here to address. So the first thought that came to my mind was that both of these things, being vulnerable and being strong, goes hand in hand. I mean, only when one person is emotionally strong can they be vulnerable with people or even with themselves, for that matter. Just to put it out there, vulnerability does not make you weak, and being strong does not mean that you will always be vulnerable with people. Vulnerability, I feel, in itself is self disclosure. It is not just about being strong and being out there with people. It is a lot to do with expressing yourself. I feel vulnerability is asking for help. I feel vulnerability is apologizing and setting boundaries. Vulnerability is receiving love, trusting people, pursuing pleasure without any bounds. I feel it's sharing of a very powerfully authentic feeling, like love, like joy, like grief. It is feeling alive. That's what I feel vulnerability has always been for me. And that is what I tell my clients as well, that when you're feeling alive is when you're being vulnerable with people or just with yourself. I feel vulnerability, according to me, is a source of connection that creates intimacy more visible. Yet so many of us, including me at times, it's happened with me a lot of times wherein I've struggled to feel worthy of pursuing and also receiving it. Because we have all had familial, cultural, and social boundaries and history that has taught us to feel threatened and unsafe, and therefore withhold your own vulnerability. A lot of people tell us, man up, be strong, you don't have to show your emotions or express your emotions, and just be out there. But that's just societal expectations and the culture history that we've been brought up with, and I feel that it's high time we break all those norms and be vulnerable, because I think being vulnerable is not just beautiful, it's cathartic and it's very, very therapeutic. I mean, learning how to be vulnerable as an adult is an ongoing process, and let me tell you, it's a really long process. Even when clients come to me in therapy, they want to get quick solutions out of therapy, and they want to get better, like in 5-10 sessions, but that's not possible. They have to get comfortable with me during the sessions, and I try and hold a very, very safe space for them as well. But even then, it takes time for you to become vulnerable and just be out there sharing your emotions, your fears, your introspection, everything with the therapist. Post a certain amount of time wherein you feel extremely comfortable with the therapist, you feel that, okay, this person can be trusted to be be vulnerable around, because it's important for us to be vulnerable with people who we trust, who we can depend on, who we know will not judge us. And that, I feel, is extremely important. We need to start reflecting and questioning just how much, with whom, and why you default to a place that is so emotionally distant. We need to figure out who are these people in our life who are making it difficult for us to be vulnerable. right? Because those people are to be eliminated immediately stat. So this is a source of distance and loneliness that you feel with others when you're, around people who make you feel emotionally distant. And it is extremely important to feel all your feelings. If you're feeling angry, say that you're angry. If you're feeling hurt, say that you're hurt. If you're scared, say that you're scared. I think it's extremely important to feel all of your feelings, and only then you can, move on to being vulnerable, finding strength in vulnerability. So ask yourself this, when was the last time I felt something like love or joy? Instead of understanding those experiences being created by the external environment, can you think of what is it inside if you allow yourself to open up? Coming to the second point that's mentioned on the PPT here, which says vulnerability is not weakness. We'll be talking about 4 life lessons which I've learned from Bren Brown. So Bren Brown is an amazing author of the book called Daring Greatly. It's a book about vulnerability and how it's a great strength to have in the journey of life that we have here. And I'm personally a huge fan of this author, and she's also a college professor, and she spent years of her life researching, talking, and writing about vulnerability as a whole. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what are the 4 lessons and strengths that I have learned from her personally. So coming to the first lesson by her is that vulnerability is not a weakness. In fact, it is the most accurate measurement of courage. So I would say that choose courage over comfort, and if you do that, then you're automatically being vulnerable and really strong. So like I said in the initial stage of this conversation, in this discussion here, that vulnerability comes with strength. It can't be without it. And that is exactly what Bren Brown has said, that choose courage over comfort, and you will be vulnerable in that process. The second lesson is that brave amongst us will always know heartbreak. So if you know you're going to be brave, then you're going to be hurt as well. And that is just the physics of vulnerability. You have to just deal with it. If you're going to be brave, you're going to get hurt by people, because being brave, again, invites a lot of courage, a lot of strength, a lot of pushing yourself to your boundaries. And that is why if you're being brave, then you're going to get hurt as well. And that is just the physics of vulnerability. Coming to the third lesson is to watch whose feedback to take. Now, when I talk about feedback, I mean that, there are millions of people in our life, and, you might have 10, 20 close friends, family members, your partners, and whatnot. Don't take feedback from everyone. Don't go around taking feedback from everybody in your life, because not everybody's feedback is going to be important. It's important for you to understand and streamline people. Acha, these are the people that matter in my life, and their opinion also matters, because their opinion is going to help me grow. It's important to watch whose feedback matters to you, watch which feedback is constructive and which feedback is blatantly critical all the time, because those people are never going to help you. Of course, people are going to tell you what are the pros and cons of your behavior and how you can change all of it, but it should be constructive, not critical all the time. So it's important for you to understand whose feedback to take and whose to ignore in the process of being vulnerable. The fourth and the final lesson is that we all are authors of our life. When we own our own story, we get to write the ending. So don't let any other version of the story own you. You own the story. Well, I absolutely love how Bren Brown has, explained in such an articulate manner that don't let the story run away from you, but be the author of the story. Right. So that's something that Bren Brown has taught us, and I've shared it with you guys as well. Now, coming to how to embrace your vulnerability, I feel that it's really important to understand that vulnerability is definitely not weakness, but a lot of people do fall into that pit of hope that, okay, if I'm being vulnerable, then I'm being weak, which is absolutely wrong. And that is why it's extremely important for us to embrace our vulnerability as a whole. So Rumi, a famous author and a poet, once said that your task is not to seek love, but to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. To fully embrace your vulnerability, it is extremely important for us to accept ourselves. Even the smallest act of letting your guard down is actually embracing vulnerability. Like I mentioned earlier, vulnerability is a lifelong process. And these small, small acts of letting go and letting your guard down is one of those many acts. To embrace vulnerability within yourself, you will have to become more aware of all your pain points. It involves healing your fractured parts, and that involves a lot of self disclosure, sharing your experiences with people who you trust and can confide in. If we keep holding on to our wounds, if we keep holding it tight, if we keep holding on to our shame, if we keep holding on to our guilt, it will only eat us away. So we need to open up and talk about that dirty little word called shame. That confronting word is vulnerability. We need to open up and be vulnerable, not just for ourselves, but also to inspire people and give them the courage to do the same. Because when we open up and be vulnerable, we are actually releasing all of our anger, our guilt, and we no longer will hold on to any shame. And it will also automatically help other people around us to be more vulnerable. So you see that it's all interconnected. Once you let loose, once you let go of that guilt, that shame, that insecurity, that anger, automatically you become vulnerable and you also help people around you. So that is exactly how you embrace your vulnerability. Now, coming to the last and the no, that's not the last. Coming to the myths of vulnerability, the most common myth I'm sure all of you might have heard here is vulnerability means that you're being weak. Vulnerability is a sign of weakness. We've spoken enough about this, time and again, even during the session today. So I thought that maybe we can talk about the lesser known myths of vulnerability. The one that I've heard is that some people have told me that Astha, I've never experienced vulnerability. Well, I feel that that's a real big myth. But the reality is, life in itself is vulnerable. So everyone on the face of this earth has experienced vulnerability in some way or the other. But what many of us do, and why we feel that we haven't experienced vulnerability, is that we respond to that vulnerability by avoiding it or by shunning it or by just not catering to that emotion in that moment. And that is why we feel, okay, we've never felt vulnerable. But that's not true. You've just avoided that feeling or that emotion altogether, and that is why you feel you haven't experienced it. Another myth that I've heard about vulnerability is that being vulnerable just means spilling out all your secrets. Well, again, like in the beginning of the session, I told you that vulnerability is not just about spilling your secrets out, telling your deepest darkest fears or your deepest darkest secrets. It's also a lot about self disclosure. It's about love, it's about grief, it's about joy and care. And it's a lot to do with self disclosure. It's a lot to do with also sharing your emotions and experiences with certain people in your life, with people who have earned the right to. And in my case, I have earned the right, to hear experiences and stories and emotions of my clients, because they feel that, okay, this therapist, this person who, we've confided in and we trust in, and, we've started this therapeutic relationship with, is, trustworthy enough to be sharing my vulnerability with. And that is why even during therapy we try to create an experience for the client which is very very holistic, and we ensure that there's 100% unconditional positive regard. And it's really important for us to hold a safe space for the clients so that they can be vulnerable, because they aren't able to be with the people around them, or because they feel unsafe, or they just can't share secrets with other people around them. So that those are some of the myths that I have experienced in my tenure of being a therapist. Coming to the last and the final topic, which is uh, how can we make our lives feel better with vulnerability, and what shared vulnerability really looks like. So we show vulnerability when we accept others vulnerability and do not immediately react defensively. Shared vulnerability can look like just one second. Something's wrong with my.
Astha ma'am, you're audible for us. You can go on.
Great, great. One second. Yeah, so we were talking about shared vulnerability. So we show our vulnerability, like I said, when we accept others and do not immediately react defensively. And how shared vulnerability can look like is by listening to people, listening to different experiences and unfamiliar viewpoints, holding space for others, like I do it with my clients, especially for those who have been denied to, hold their voices or tell their stories. Because, a lot of people have never gotten the chance to really express themselves, or, be held, somebody has never held space for them. So it's important for us as individuals to listen to people. Secondly, reflecting on something even when it makes us feel uncomfortable or uneasy, reflecting on how to express yourself without erasing yourself or the other person. It's really important, when you're having a conversation with a loved one, with a close person in life, and they are sharing something which is really, really close to them, which they've never really spoken about. It's important for you to sit down, listen to them, and reflect. You don't have to immediately, dump your emotional baggage on them altogether, because that's going to make them feel unsafe and uncomfortable, because they're out there trying to be vulnerable in front of you, and all that you are doing is shunning them down and, dumping your emotional baggage on them. So reflecting and listening are really, really important when it comes to shared vulnerability. And lastly, shifting your views by changing your perspective, the way you use your language, how you interact with others, and how you think about yourself, even just in the sense of good and bad. So it's important for also shifting your views, shifting your perspective. And, I love the word perspectives, because I came up with this name for my page as well, the perspective book, because I feel that changing and shifting your perspectives with each person you meet in life is so important. And even, if you've had a conversation or you've had an experience in life wherein you learned nothing, there is something that you gain at the end of it, which is perspective. You gain perspective about everything in life, every single thing. So I think it's important, even when you're being vulnerable, to understand the other person's perspective, even though it makes you feel uneasy or uncomfortable. So basically, what shared vulnerability and how to be vulnerable and also let other people be vulnerable with you is just moving on from rigidity to fluidity. And of course, it's easier said than done, but we have to start somewhere, right? So